working okay on the other side there. Excellent, excellent. So I just want to start by saying that I'm just thrilled that we were able to do this movie this year, this video. We've been trying to do this project for probably a couple of years. So we were really fortunate to be able to get out there. And we collaborated with a really great video production company called Hazel Oliver Creative. They came out and helped us get the drone footage and the interview footage with the various volunteers and with Elizabeth. And they just did really a great job. And I also want to say thank you to the Utah State Historic Preservation Office because this film was also, it was produced and funded basically by that office through a grant funding. So we're really thrilled that we were able to produce a really great public and educational outreach film about this amazing site. And it really brings awareness to not only the preserve, but also what it kind of takes to preserve a site like this and the importance of preservation. Here's some photos of us out filming. This is Elizabeth and the videographer Mitch standing near what we think is probably a wiki up on the site here. And this property was protected by the Smith family prior to our ownership. They protected and preserved this property for many decades before us. And they did a spectacular job. And they donated it to the Conservancy, and I'm actually spacing the actual date right now. But they generously donated 200 acres of prime real estate on the west side of Utah Lake. And it is not just petroglyphs, but an archaeological landscape that's very important, especially in this area, because of what we know, a lot of Fremont culture sites are not really, they're not preserved right now. They're under houses, they're in farm fields. There's not a lot of sites like this represented on vacant property anymore. And so this is a real treasure. And we just really couldn't do this. Whoops. We really couldn't do it without the help of our volunteers. I just want to say thank you to everybody that they conduct seasonal tours in the spring and the fall. And if you all watched the film, you got to hear from some of our really passionate, wonderful volunteers who help us not only conduct tours in public education and bring school groups there, but they're also helping us take care of the site, make sure everything is not, it's locked down, that people aren't trespassing, that we're maintaining it, and that it's really cared for. It's just a really spectacular landscape, and we're so just grateful for people like Elizabeth, who are helping us understand more what this all means too. Because, in the video you hear Elizabeth talk about how this is a really, we haven't done a lot of research here. We still don't know a lot yet, and so there's still so much to learn. And this is one of the really important reasons why sites like this need to be preserved, so that we can understand them and study them in the future. And I just want to say just a quick thing about, you might ask, what are we protecting the site from? But the site is, there's active threats all around. There's public open space that touches the north of this site where people park their RVs and get curious. There's gravel mining operations just north of this. There's encroachment coming from residential areas, coming from Saratoga Springs in the north there too. It's really, if you're driving around this area, there's so much property for sale. And if this property had not been protected that way, we wouldn't have this amazing resource today. So with that, I would just like to turn it over to Elizabeth and let her say a few words as well.
Hey, thank you so much, April. And thanks to all of you for taking time out of your busy Thursday afternoons and evenings to join us. The Smith Preserve is a really remarkable place. I think if you've seen the video, you might have gotten a sense of how it is preserving that bit of that historic feel of a landscape really close to what's a really busy town, right? Provo. But more than that, I want to talk a little bit about what the connections are that we see here. So let me start sharing a little bit. One of the things that I've come to realize a lot, and maybe the last few months especially, is a lot of people have heard, well, not a lot. Some people have heard of the term the Fremont, right? It's an archaeological culture that we call the Fremont, but maybe don't know how the Fremont ties into people that exist today. And understanding who the descendants of this group of people living across much of modern day Utah, understanding who they they are, who their descendants are, can really help us understand the importance of why we even care about the Fremont. And so the Fremont have connections in some way to dozens of modern tribes that live in the area today, and even folks who live as far away as Oklahoma. The Kiowa likely have their roots, some of their roots anyway, up here in Fremont country. So, of course, you have all of the Puebloan folks, the people in the Rio Grande Valley and the Hopi Pueblos, but also Ute people, Apache people, Navajo, Goshute, Shoshone, Paiute. All of these folks can look back to various places across Utah during the Fremont period and say, no, I have stories of this. My people are from here. And we know that across the preserve as well. I've talked to a lot of different people who say, yeah, this is familiar to me. These kinds of petroglyphs, they tell the stories that I'm familiar with. This feels like home, right? This is home. And to think about how much home is to folks who were out here, you've really got to put it in terms of that 13,000 years of human history out here. This is a very ballpark kind of timeline. I'm not very, I'm not very precious about particular dates because I think we start to lose the forest for the trees a little bit. What I want to show you is that the people who were living all the way out here in the Fremont period and in the late Archaic, where we see a lot of the rock imagery originating from on the preserve, they've been on this landscape for thousands of years beforehand and not necessarily making rock imagery. That was something that really started coming about in the latter few centuries of the Archaic period and through the Fremont period. But they were still living on the land, much in their ancestral ways. Once you hit, the late Archaic, people were pretty mobile. They were going between winter hunting grounds and pinyon groves up on the hillsides and up in the mountains, and then in the spring and in the summer, coming down into those valleys and taking advantage of marshlands, all of the amazing, seasonal birds that are going to come out there. You're going to need those for food and for ceremony and for medicine. All of the reeds and incredible plants that you get down there, those are blooming and those are growing the best in the springtime. And so here on the preserve, we've got a little bit of a blend of both. So you can see I've pointed out Utah Lake, and I apologize if it's a little difficult to see. And we're sitting right here next to the Wasatch Range. This is where our water is coming from. This is the largest freshwater lake here in Utah. You can see Bear Lake a little. I don't know if you could see my cursor, but up here is Bear Lake. This is the Great Salt Lake. It's fairly low, even for, the late Holocene that we're in. And this is Utah Lake right down here. And you can see people today are clustering right on the edge of the Wasatch Range, just like they were throughout history, but particularly in the Fremont period. The Wasatch Range is catching a lot of moisture and importantly, a lot of snowpack. And as it melts, it's delivering that moisture down into the valleys at really crucial times of the year when we don't get moisture. Unlike the Southwest, we don't get a very strong monsoonal pattern out here. So when it's July, August, September, it gets dry and dusty. So this freshwater lake becomes extremely important. Also, if you had seen the video, you heard me talk about the Colorado Plateau, that's kind of this beige section down at the bottom, and the Great Basin to the west. And you could see that Utah Lake is at this crossroads between the two of them. So here again, thinking about these marshlands in the springtime as really important places for not only food, but various other building materials, sewing and weaving materials, medicinal materials, and ceremony materials. And then, of course, we are in the West Desert. This really is the gateway to the basin and range country that marks just the longest ever sagebrush desert from Salt Lake to Reno, Nevada. Parts of it are pretty barren, but there are oases of importance and oases of human interest where people are gathering tool stones, where people are meeting up for, fall pinyon nut gathering and winter pinyon nut gathering. So it's not as though this desert is just an utter wasteland. It was alive with people. And the way that we're seeing people work and operate sort of on the west side of Utah Lake here has a lot to do with this basin and range pattern. Like I said, we're starting out in the late Archaic when we see a lot of people starting to spend more time at the Smith Preserve and importantly, starting to make rock imagery. The archaeological record here, we do have about 7 sites out here, only 2 or 3 of which have rock imagery. The other sites have things like chipped stone and chipped stone tools. There are a few pieces of ground stone out there, and there is one possible storage pit, not without poking into it and doing a little testing. It's not clear if that's going to be late Archaic or Fremont. But this is sort of what the Archaic period sites look like. People are not living in pit houses. People are not making pottery. People are making basketry, which is not going to preserve on an open site like this. And a lot of what we do find preserved are these tool stone sets. And of course, importantly, our rock imagery. So people in this or in this time period, pardon, were making what we call abstract rock imagery, and especially abstract curvilinear rock imagery. And all that really means is abstract is anything that like I cannot tell you for the life of me what that might look like, as opposed to representational, where if you've given me, a bighorn sheep, pretty much anyone who's seen a bighorn sheep can tell you that that's a bighorn sheep. They draw them with really big horns. So that one's pretty easy. But this, to us today, this might look like scissors. Scissors with some things, if you could see my cursor again, coming across them out here. It's not clear if this is representing something, what it might represent. So we call it abstract. And then curvilinear means that it has a lot of curving, circular, loopy aspects. That's to differentiate it from rectilinear. That tends to be earlier, and we tend to see it more towards Reno. If you're interested, or if you're going out towards Reno, let me know, and I can direct you to a really great, nicely hardened site where you can go and see some of these rectilinear things. So that's our archaic, right? People are living a little light on the landscape. The things that we tend to find are the hard parts of civilization that last, things made of rock. Whereas we get into the Fremont period, we have a lot more people, and they're beginning to blend farming, which has some sedentism into it, with that hunting and gathering. Here, importantly, on the west side of the Smith Preserve, although we do see some Fremont influence, it's only really in the graphic depictions of people. On the ground, the way that people are living is a lot in that archaic tradition. And so that tells me as an archaeologist that we might be looking at a population of people who are living here from the archaic, right? They're going winter mountain, summer basin, winter mountain, summer basin, just as their ancestors have for 8,000 years. And then some guy, bunch of folks really, from the Colorado Plateau come walking up with corn. And they say, hey, are you using this area? Because this would be really good for us to grow corn. And if it's not really something that you need, if you're going Pinyon Grove to marshland, can we use this riverine zone in between? So the archaic folks living here might have said, yeah, sure, but tell me more about what it is you're doing. And then we start seeing that these two cultures are interacting in different ways, and it's not really clear beyond that, right? The archaeological record is largely unstudied for this area. So how these two populations got along together or didn't is going to vary by area and vary by time period. So this site can really help us to understand how people were incorporating each other into each other's lives, livelihoods, ceremony, and society, right? So the Fremont pattern in general does incorporate this farming tradition and this foraging tradition. They blend them together in a really unique way that creates a super duper resilient economic base. And so these are folks who were able to thrive in this desert area, and they were able to cope with a lot of the dynamic environmental changes that we were seeing during the medieval climate anomaly when these folks were putting down roots out here. So not only do we have the archaic people, we've got new folks coming in. Part of the reason why they're coming in is as climate is warming, these farmers are needing to invest more in farming and they're needing to always find the next place and the next place and the next place as they're having more and more kids, more and more relatives are coming in to say, "Ooh, the farming seems like it's working. We're going to stay with you guys." So the Fremont system incorporates the both of these. And when we look at their material culture, we stop seeing that there's a distinction. We can say, yeah, this is an archaic-ish kind of life way, but like out here, we've got Fremont rock imagery, right? So they're keying into something that is going to be uniquely Fremont. So the other thing to know about the preserve, and especially if you're planning on heading out there, is the preserve is going to have a guide take you around. You want that guide. This is really difficult to see. So I've got a few slides that are going to help you out. This is a little, I'm not even sure if I like how this one's drawn. It's just really tough to see some of these. Let's find a few better ones. So this is a good example of what might be that archaic design because it's, oh, I guess I didn't have a good slideshow there, but it's fairly abstract, right? It looks like we've got a straight line coming through with two dots on either end, and then we have these curving out elements. It looks to me like a rib cage, but even in so saying, like I might be predisposing any of you who might, who might one day research this, I might be predisposing you to something that is just off the wall. It's just what I think it looks like. Here we have what might be a human figure. Archaeologists will say anthropomorph, human, anthropomorph figure. Um, Really, I'm mostly getting that from this head, arm, and torso configuration. The rest of it's a little bit difficult to see. So here at the Smith Preserve, we do have over 300 boulders that have at least one panel each on them. And each of these panels has at least one rock imagery element or figure or glyph on them. So I have not totaled up how many individual glyphs that makes because that would be a huge project. Also, when you get something abstract like this, sometimes it's hard to know, is this one figure? Is this two figures? Do we have earlier? Do we have later? Um, so I think the only thing I can say is there are thousands of rock imagery symbols like this out on the rocks there. And it's not a huge place, it's something that if you were to spend a day, you could probably see almost every boulder that's out there just because they're so tightly packed and so tightly clustered. Here's a really good example of one of those bighorn sheep I was talking to you about. We would probably identify this as a bighorn sheep because even though it has three legs and ideally you're going to see four, I might have recorded it incorrectly, right? I think I can see four legs here. But regardless, it has those really big horns coming out of the top of its head. Bighorn sheep, all the way from, 9 Mile Canyon, all the way out to the Coso Range in California by like Owens Valley, I think people across this area were hooked into bighorn sheep as something important, as a hunted commodity or as a symbol of something. And there's a huge debate about what that could mean, but I think it's worth noting that on this site, like at a lot of Fremont sites and archaic sites, people are like, yeah, bighorn sheep. We need to have at least a few of those out here. Here is another petroglyph that, I used to think that this big thing out here that looks like a net, I used to think two things. I used to think, of course, this is archaic because it's curvilinear. And of course, it's a fishing net. We're next to the shoreline. I've seen a few more sites that have dissuaded me for this now. I've seen a few of these on Fremont sites, and I haven't seen as many on archaic sites. And also, I haven't seen these always associated with an area that I would assume would be good for fishing. So this could be, if it is at all a net, it could be a hunting net. Hunting nets are really remarkable in that they can be super crazy big. They are so long. They're usually only a few feet tall, 1 to maximum 3 feet high. But it's usually an investment of a lot of families weaving it together, because you're going to need a lot of people to hold up this net. And then you go through the brush and you come in and you circle around all the critters inside, most often rabbits. But this is a nice activity that, you can get little kids in on. You gotta do something with kids during these days. I got my kid home from summer and like I'm about to have him go out and catch rabbits. You gotta keep him busy. Also, on the Smith Preserve, we do have what look like net fishing weights. So, another point on the side of maybe this is a net best used for fishing is people would take these small rocks and make a little groove through the center of them and wrap their cord around it. And in that way, you have your fishing net, maybe like a circular net. You can throw it out and it'll sink down, capture those fish. So that's an option. All right, and we've only got a couple more slides, I promise. And then it's Q&A time. Here is another just gosh, I I want to say a head scratcher, right? Because to me, I cannot tell you much about this, but that's because I am not myself indigenous. I am not descended from the people who made this. That's why it's so important, that first slide, the Fremont were a lot of different people. So there are people around this part of the world that, they might see this and know right off the bat what it is. What I can say is it looks like it is got the head of maybe a horned serpent, and we see that a lot. It's a motif that's possibly coming up out of Mesoamerica. It's very water related. But why this probable horned serpent has things that look a little bit like arms is absolutely not clear to me. Again, I am but an observer on this culture. I am not from within it. So there might be people out there who are like, I know. And it's up to them if they decide that they don't want to share that information. We should respect that. Not everything is amenable. Not everything is appropriate to being openly known. This is one of my favorite things to see out here because I love a petroglyph that I can recognize. So this looks to me like a badger claw or maybe a really overgrown bear claw. Um, Bear claws we see a lot associated in later Ute sites. This isn't the most bearish bear claw, if it is bear. It could be badger because it does have those long arced claws. Um, but with all of these sorts of animals, these are things that I would expect to see a little bit later on in the time period. We don't see them a ton in the archaic, which is not to say never. Tricky here. So a lot of this is maybe some of that earlier abstract. It's curvy. It's a little bit difficult to tell what it might be. But down here we have someone wearing a horned headdress. This is probably a human figure of some kind. That reads very Fremont to us. So our Fremont stuff, we start to see people with horned headdresses. Okay, I think this might be one of our last ones. Just to show you that some of these panels are extremely complicated out here. People were coming back here again and again and again over the course of thousands of years. And so the first person etched the first few things onto stone, and then the next year when someone else came out here, this had already been marked off as an important space, potentially a sacred space, a space for observing certain ceremony, or doing certain things, right? And so that was built on year after year after year. And so what we're seeing on these sites, and a lot of rock imagery sites, in fact, um, is the end result of centuries or millennia of people growing this site by accretion and continually renewing and refreshing its importance and perhaps imbuing new or different importance and meaning onto it. So it's really important when we go to these sites, right? These sites are living places. These sites continue to record our presence. And so we want to make really sure that we're not touching things or leaving things behind and that we're watching where we walk because these are places that are really open to receiving human touch. They've been doing it for millennia. And the people who were here before were highly intentional about the touch that they left on this landscape and on these rocks. We want to make sure that we stay intentional about this too. So those are the slides that I had to share with you. I hope that it was able to give you guys a little bit of a different perspective on the Smith Preserve and about how this, fits into the larger story of the Fremont, the Great Basin, archaic people. And if you want to get in touch with me, here is how you can do it. And I will turn it back to April. Thank you, April.
Well, excellent. Um, we're opening it up for questions and answers at this point if anybody has any questions. We did have a question earlier from Joe, and he was asking us what the building, he was looking at the satellite map and he wanted to know what the building and the parking lot is. And that's not a building, it's an educational kiosk that was constructed by volunteers a few years ago. I have pictures of it, but hopefully you guys will come out and visit the site sometime and you'll see it in person. But there's no structures per se on the property, except for this kiosk and a nice parking lot where we can have visitors. So, and he also asked the question, he asked me what the diagonal lines were on the landscape toward the beach. And I think aren't those natural rock alignments, Elizabeth?
They are, yeah. Let me actually pull that one up so that we
Thank you.
can see it. Yeah, no, good eye. Really good eye. Oh my gosh, let me make sure and tell me, because I'm looking at the slides and I want to make sure I'm showing the right one. So these diagonal lines, if we're thinking about this landscape, these lines are mountains. This is our basin and range province. And then I'm not sure if we could see the lines. Yeah, it's actually, we're not able to see the lines on the preserve here because I don't have our aerial map of it.
I have a little map. You want me to bring up my map, the one that I have
Yeah,
on
let's do that.
parcel?
Maybe we're thinking about that one because this
Let me
isn't,
do that really
yeah,
fast.
this isn't at the scale that I thought it was.
It's okay. I had it ready just in case, so hold
Yeah.
on a second. Gonna do this.
Yeah, so in general, those diagonal lines, some of them are diagonal and some of them have kind of a swooshy. And those are uplifted sediments. So they are uplifted stones. They are alternating as sandstone and limestone, sandstone and limestone. So this used to be an inland sea. These date from, gosh, I say Jurassic all the time, but I think this is also the Jurassic era. Um, or maybe that was the hot one. It's from dinosaur times. Archaeologists don't know a ton about dinosaurs often. It's from way earlier than I know about. It's from when, there was this inland sea out here. And so these were sediments in the bottom of the sea, and we've got sand that was being deposited into sandstone. And then also other sediments, that make limestone. So limestone has a lot of like calcium in it. So think about like your shellfish and things, those have a lot of calcium to them. And so we've got limestone as well. These sediments are overlain one on top of each other, and then as different processes of folding and faulting have occurred, they've actually started to, instead of be lying down like this, they're lifting up like this. And so they're exposed as outcrops that are kind of slanty here. And as we go through, we can see that people were selecting sandstone and largely ignoring the limestone, but we maybe don't know why.
Trying to see. I think you can kind of see the uplift in the back there. Is that true there, Elizabeth? Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
I'm in the wrong place. Hold on.
Okay.
There. Is
Yeah,
that
you can
better?
see. That's it.
Mhm.
Yep. So you can see that uplift. Most of what you're able to see is actually the limestone. The limestone is like some of our biggest bands. So those like really intense bands, those are limestone. And our sandstone is actually like little scatterings in between them. People were not using the limestone, or the rock imagery was not holding on to the limestone, because we have only found one boulder with one petroglyph on there that is made of limestone.
Hmm, interesting.
Yeah, weird, huh?
Oh, we have a few questions popping in here. Let's see here.
Great.
Um, let's see here. And I always say it wrong, but they're asking, they say they see is it Unita? Unita? How do you say,
Uinta!
thank you, Uinta Mountains? They're asking, how close is it to the Uinta Mountains?
Not super duper close. Let me see if I can find what it is as the crow flies, but I'm actually sitting right around the midpoint right now. So I live outside of Park City. I live in just outside of Heber, Utah. And where we think about the Uinta Mountains and the people who were in the Uintas, we're thinking about folks who were sort of between White Rocks and Vernal. And so just as the crow flies, that is, let's see in miles. That is 115 miles. So we're not incredibly close. There are a lot of known passages through this area to get from the Uinta Basin to here. So Spanish Fork is really well known. I believe Dominguez and Escalante even came down through the Spanish Fork route, so it was known by that point in time for sure. And then there are a variety of other ones. There are people are coming down from the northern Uintas, coming down through Echo Canyon. So people were definitely going east-west in this way, um, but they're not highly related. We call them all Fremont, though.
Let's see here. Someone shared that they've driven by this place a million times and they just learned about it today. And they want to know if there's plans to make it more public. And um, the answer is that the public education piece of that is definitely the tours, the seasonal tours that happen in the spring and October, where people are taken, like she said, with a guide who take them out to the site and show them the petroglyphs and the landscape and talk about things a little more. But I think we also will schedule, and correct me if I'm wrong, Elizabeth, but I'm thinking we also schedule special tours for groups and for school children and things like that. So there's those opportunities. Or if you're in town visiting, perhaps maybe that's an option if it's the weather's cooperating. Because I understand it gets really hot out there in the summer. So it's not a place you want to be probably till October, Elizabeth.
October is a good time. Right
Yeah,
now, if any of you guys are in Salt Lake, I would pray that you have air conditioning, because it is about 102 degrees out there today.
yeah, I believe that.
Um, which is convenient because anything over 90 degrees kills the bugs that right now will plague you if you're going out to these sites along any of our shorelines. It's just a rough
Absolutely.
time of year.
Yes, it is. And they also asked about, and this is important to you, they asked about the fire damage. They were curious if the fire had damaged or exposed anything that hadn't been seen previously, though. Was there anything that was revealed by the fire?
A good question. So, for those of you who don't know, in 2020, when we were all hunkering down for COVID, there was a wildfire that swept through just a little bit north. And then some people tried to evade the police blockage. The cops were out there on on the roadway, Redwood Road, turning people around because it was unsafe. There were a few people who were, perhaps, we'll just say they were nervous about a potential run-in with law enforcement, and they decided to Bonnie and Clyde it right around. And they did crash their vehicle and start another fire that ripped through the preserve. Um, that that fire was raging during the night, and so the county did not know whose land it was, did not know how to get in contact with the landowner, and had no reason to believe that there was anything out there that would be precious or sacred. And so they did bulldoze a line. They bulldozed a fire cut. You can still see it today. It's going to take a generation for that scar in the landscape to heal. The good news is they did not hit any of the boulders that had rock imagery on it. Our staff went out immediately after the burn, walked the area, and they came really close in a couple of instances, but those boulders were not touched, which was really nice. And then, yeah, burns are a blessing and a curse because we do see a lot more now. I mean, that wiki up that April showed, when I first went out there, it was overgrown by sagebrush, and I wasn't sure it was a wiki up. I was like, that might just be some rocks. But once all the sagebrush had burned up and blown away, I was like, yeah, that's pretty round. That's kind of circular. Also, we're finding a lot more lithic debitage, so the remnants from when people were making chipstone tools. And it's just, yeah, you do see a lot of other stuff out there. So it's a blessing and a curse. Right now, they're trying to stabilize the sediments and encourage native regrowth, and that's going to be a challenge for a while. Oh, April, you're muted. Oh, there
Yeah,
we go.
yeah, I'm sorry. I was like, whoops. Let's see here. Um, And I should probably add about the public education piece of that because I think that, we walk a fine line sometimes letting people know too much and having people get curious and go out there on their own versus being, signing up for tours and going on guided tours with a docent or a volunteer. So I mean, like we would like for more people to visit the site and learn about it, but we also have to be careful that we're not revealing too much and having people trespass and loot and vandalize and things like that. So just want to add that little piece in there before we move on. Um, there is a question here about what kind of tools did they use to make the glyphs?
What a question. That is so hard to know. So it's got to be something that's harder than sandstone. We know that. And we can tell by how fine a lot of these dots are that they were using a hammer and chisel method. Um, got this here. I'll use this as my chisel, and my phone will be my hammer, right? So hitting it like that a million times. Um, Any rock that you're doing this with is going to dull really quickly. It's also going to shatter a little bit. You might have some micro debitage raining down. And it's going to get less precise. So you're going to need to resharpen it. Um, the crazy thing is I don't find a lot of microdebitage around. Maybe it's buried. Maybe we would find that if we excavate, but we don't know. I've heard it said before that people might be using antler for this as well. I don't know that antler is going to get the job done. It might be a little too soft, but it probably also depends too on the surface, the type of sandstone that people were using. This sandstone, while it's fairly soft, crunching through that dark patina on the top of it would take a little bit of force and effort. I would want a rock harder than sandstone. Obsidian would be ideal, but I would take, any other sort of uh igneous rock, right? So I'd take an andesite, I'd take a basalt, I'd take something like that.
Okay, good answer. It's a question we get a lot. I think people see the petroglyphs and it doesn't always occur to them like, oh, what did they use to make those, right?
Yeah, yeah. Oh, and I mean, we should add too, we have no idea if these had pigment on them. They're exposed. Any pigment would be gone within a season. So if these had brighter colors, that's no longer known to us.
Wow.
Yeah.
So one of the final questions here, it looks like, is they're asking if we plan to build or put some kind of like roadside marker for this site. I've never considered that, but maybe it's an option in the future if we want to talk about, Fremont culture and petroglyphs and just in general, that history. I mean, it could be something we might think about in the future, maybe down the road. But does Utah have a state marker program, Elizabeth? Do you know?
Um, yeah, so what we do generally for this is we work with oh, I think an award shop, a plaque shop, and we'll do the National Register of Historic Places plaque if that's what you're looking for. So we do have a National of Historic Places nomination written. I do need to get that in front of our committee, but it is written because this is a really unique landscape. So it is eligible for inclusion to the National Register under criteria A for events because this is a pretty momentous event in human history when two massive cultures with, incredible depth collide. It's also eligible under C for association with a type, specifically Utah type curvilinear stuff. Um, and work of a master is what we also call it too. So we would say, yeah, the people who made these petroglyphs were masterful at their craft. And then finally, it is also eligible under criterion D for its information potential, because as you've seen here, there's so much, and we're really scratching the surface. We're just starting to learn about these folks.
Well, thank you. I think that was all the questions that I saw. I hope we got to everybody's questions. But I just want to thank everybody for coming tonight. And this is just such a special site. And I think a lot of people don't know about it. But if you ever come to this area, I highly encourage you, if you're in the area in like April or October, to try to sign up for a tour. I was blown away. I got to visit it for the very first time in April, and I was just in awe. It's just such a special landscape when you're looking at all these houses and gravel mines and all this stuff, and people shooting across the road and damaging petroglyphs on the other side, and then you have this beautiful, pristine landscape that probably looks a lot like it did when people were visiting it hundreds of years ago. So, again, thank you to all the volunteers and everybody, the Smith family, and everyone who has helped protect and preserve this amazing site. So, and thank you, Elizabeth, so much for being a part of this.
Of course. Yeah, I want to second it. It's such a community effort out here. I've seen a lot of folks in the attendee section who have been really instrumental to like the continued upkeep and advocacy for this site. So thank you guys. It's
Couldn't
really
do it without them, for sure.
the backbone of it. Yeah. And
Um,
yeah, holler if you need any questions. I'm here to answer questions. So
yeah,
great.
absolutely. Please feel free to email either one of us if you have questions after this event. So, with that, I think unless Tracy has something to add, I think we're probably ready to say goodnight to everybody.
Good night.
Good night, everybody. Thank you so
So
much for
much.
coming.
Thanks for having me. Good to
Thank
see you
you, Elizabeth.
guys.
Much
Thank
appreciated.
you. We'll see you next time.
See ya.